Yeah. Did you? We went 1 to 6. Oh, it's
All right, good morning, guys.
Good
Morning. With me? Okay, now I know you all remember this, but I'm just going to remind you one more time. We are on camera, so wave to my professor, wave to my classmates. Mostly, I don't know if you can tell, but the camera's kind of mostly pointed kind of at me, so you're.
Okay, good.
You know.
I forgot about
Well, especially some of you, we keep you in the back, make sure it's kind of pointed.
I might break the camera.
Seems to be the appropriate, yeah. Well, it's probably already broken if it's pointed at me. And there you go.
I just can't
All right, so what we're going to be doing today is we are going to start our Odyssey unit. And like I told you before, I know we're kind of stuck in the middle. Yes, earlier this week, you took your pre-test. And actually, I've never done anything like that before. And I got some really interesting results. There were some things that almost everybody seemed to know that I was very impressed with. Several of you had some experiences with the Odyssey and things like that. And some of these stories of the Trojan War and stuff. Yes, ma'am?
Who wrote the most
Oh, crap, I forgot. I said I was going to do that, and I was going to hand out treats. There were several people that had a bunch. I will go back through and double check. I will get to that though. Thank you for saying. Thank you for reminding me. I still have all that stuff, but I forgot to keep a tally. I think a couple people had like well over 20 though. So if that's where you were, then that's where those of you guys are the winners. But just about everybody was able to put down a few gods and goddesses and stuff like that. So that was really good. Some people had very limited experience, and that's perfectly fine. And other people had pretty extensive experience. A lot of you guys had seen like the Percy Jackson movies and stuff like that. Had more of you had seen 300 than probably I thought was appropriate for people of your age. But stuff like that. So you have some sort of vague understanding of gods and goddesses and how that works and stuff. So what we're going to do is I've got one thing I want to talk about with all of you guys, just for a minute, and then we're going to split you guys into 3 groups. And 2 of the groups will be working on your own in the library, and the 3rd group will be here kind of working together, and hopefully the idea being that everybody will be on the same page and everybody will be caught up by the time we get started in this unit in earnest. So, the thing I want to talk about was the thing that I was the most surprised about in looking at your evaluations or your pretest was that almost everybody had at least a baseline understanding of the difference between monotheistic and polytheistic gods, like what those 2 things mean. Can you get a quick definition from all of you that knew that? Go ahead.
Polytheistic is where you believe in more than one God, and monotheistic is where you believe in
So again, monotheistic meaning one God, polytheistic meaning many gods. And almost everybody knew that, which I was impressed. That's a kind of a difficult concept. But that's all anybody put. That was the only thing anybody put on their papers was polytheistic, many gods, monotheistic, one God. And what's important about that is not the definition, but what does that mean for us as a society, as opposed to what it meant to the people in Odysseus' time of the ancient Greeks. For the most part, we have eliminated the polytheistic, many gods religious system. There aren't, aside from a few outliers, there aren't really polytheistic religions anymore. Again, with outliers outstanding. Most religions today are monotheistic. Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, most of the major religions in the world are now monotheistic versus polytheistic. So we need to have an understanding of how the ancient Greeks' polytheistic belief system affected their culture and affected everything about what they thought and how some of like the baseline assumptions about the world were different because of this polytheistic religion versus monotheistic. So first of all, let's talk about, and when we talk about monotheistic religions, I want to just say flat out, we're mostly, in this class, we're mostly going to talk about Christianity, just because that's the one that you guys know. You guys know from talking to me, I don't have any particular affinity towards Christianity or any religion for that matter. So, but I'm going to use that one because that's the one that most of us are familiar with. If you do not subscribe to that religion, or don't subscribe to any religion, I'm not in any way trying to make any sort of statements in any way, other than just giving us a common ground to talk from. But in the Christian religion, it's very common to say, one of the common phrases is, we say, the Lord works in mysterious ways, right? The Lord works in mysterious ways. You don't see, if you believe in a monotheistic religion, you don't see the impact of God in a direct way on your day-to-day life. If you are in a car accident and you don't die, and you say, well, God was really looking out for me that day. God was watching over me, God was helping me, God was protecting me. What you don't say is that God came down from heaven, picked up my car, and moved it to the other side of the road. Or that God came down and put his hands out and stopped the other car before it crashed into me. Right? You think of God in a more mysterious sort of way. But the ancient Greeks did not. For the ancient Greeks, the gods did not work in mysterious ways. The gods worked in very direct, very straightforward ways. And those of you that have read some of these stories and have familiarity with these stories understand that because you've seen it. Like literally, someone like Zeus, if Zeus didn't like a guy, he would throw a thunderbolt down from the sky and kill them. If a god really liked someone, they would, physically appear to help them fight in battle. And you might be fighting a sword fight with somebody, and then all of a sudden, there's Hermes standing next to you, fighting by your side, or Athena, or Hera, or Hera might appear and hand a sword or a shield to someone and say, here, use this shield that one of the other gods made with his own two hands, and use that shield to fight your enemy. In a very literal, very direct way. And so what that does is that creates a different relationship with the gods of the ancient Greeks versus what most people see as their relationship with God. Right? Maybe in a monotheistic religion, you may pray to God, but you don't really expect God to answer. And if God is talking to you, either you become a TV preacher and make a lot of money, or you become what we call, most people consider a crazy person, and they lock you away, right? Because God told me to kill this person. Well, that's not really going to work, right? So, but for the ancient Greeks, it was not uncommon at all for a god, to appear to a mortal and talk to them. It was not uncommon for a god or a goddess to appear to a mortal and have children with them. The physical contact with someone that way, that in a way that produces offspring. And we'll talk more about that some other time. But that's what's important that I want you to see about this, is that would create a very different relationship with the gods. When someone says you should pray to God about that for guidance or wisdom or whatever, you do so. But for the ancient Greeks, it was like, you pray to this God because if you don't, they're going to get mad at you. And if they get mad at you, they might kill you. Literally. Come down from Mount Olympus, which is the equivalent of heaven, walk up to your house, and stab you in the face. or the equivalent of that. I mean, that was a legitimate concern. Also, because of this, you have this situation where in a monotheistic religion, you have gods as this all-knowing, all-powerful sort of entity, right? And you say things like, in the Christian religion, you talk about God is everywhere, God is in everything, God is all around us, that sort of thing. Because God is, capital G God, is everything and everywhere. Whereas for the ancient Greeks, because there were more than one God, many gods, in fact, many gods, and many levels of deity and things like that, that creates a system where the power of any one god is limited. And they had certain things that they were all powerful of. For example, if you're Poseidon, if you're going on a sea journey, you would pray to Poseidon, the god of the sea, because you're going to be on the sea. And if you didn't, you would pay the penalty for that. But if you were on land, it's not a lot you have to worry about with Poseidon. If you live in a place where you're not anywhere near the water, anywhere near the sea, you can pretty much ignore Poseidon and pray to another god, pray to somebody different, or whatever. And so this limited power of the gods creates a different relationship that we'll see, and we'll see how this plays out as the stories play out. So how do we feel about that? Does that make sense? Does that kind of fit with your understanding of this? Like I said, almost everybody seemed to know what that meant, the idea of polytheism. How does that fit with the way that you've thought of it in the past? No, I know, Richardson asking you to think. I'm sorry. It's okay, I've talked to them a lot about how you guys don't ever talk, so. No, we're good? Good. Okay. All right. Well, I guess we'll just keep moving then. So what we're going to do now is we're going to split into groups. I'd like to see, let's just literally split the room. Let's see, I need Julia, Chrissy, Nick, Astra, Brandon, Aaron, and Natalie. And let's just kind of get you guys kind of over here and kind of get the rest of you kind of over there for a minute. And we'll split up and then we'll...
Is that one group?
What's that?
Just one group.
Yeah, the big. I'm gonna send the smaller groups out. Okay. You two are group 3, and the rest of you guys are group 2. So you 5 are group 2. Just sit somewhere, guys. Just sit. It'll be all right. Okay. So what you guys are going to do is I'm going to send you guys over to the library, and group 3, and what you're both going to be doing is both groups are doing the same thing. You're going to be doing a research paper, a mini research paper, just a couple of paragraphs. I'm not expecting anything real fancy. But what you're going to do, I've got a couple of videos for you to look at. You can go to my website and find links if you can get to it through the filters and however you want to get there and watch the videos. And then group 2, you'll be doing yours specifically on the goddess Athena, because Athena is like number 1 in the Odyssey. In group 3, you're going to be looking at the guy who found the real Troy. This guy named Hendrik Schliemann who found the actual place. So there's a video, there's like a fairly long video on YouTube. It'll be part of the video to watch. This one, the Athena video is a little shorter. And then you're going to be, if you look at the instructions, it says 3 sources, not Wikipedia. One of them is the video, something else on the web, and something else in writing, probably just the encyclopedia. You don't have to overthink this. Again, you're not giving you a ton of time. So the idea is you're going to take those sources, synthesize them together, and come up with a couple paragraphs on the topic. So you 2 on Schliemann and Troy, you 5 on Athena. Good. Questions? Comments? work together if you're having problems. Yeah, you should write your own report, but if you need to double up to look at the videos or whatever, they're expecting you to do it in the library. So you can look at it on the library computers, or I told them your iPads, or I don't care, use your phones, that sort of thing. Follow the library rules. Okay, so you're good? Good. Actually, I just assumed you were here since we're taping. That way, I don't have to talk so loud to get to the whole room. Is that okay?
Don't ever do that again.
All right, now that all the rabble is gone, get rid of the rabble. No, but based on the testing that we got, this was a group that I didn't feel like was quite as up on your Greek mythology. So, big deal, right? If it's not a thing you're into, it's not a thing you're into. People like my daughter, who's 12 years old and knows all this stuff about the gods and goddesses. It's just what she's into. So don't think that it matters. It's just a difference in what you know and what you didn't know. And so for those guys, I'm going to talk to you guys about some things that they should already know, and they should be all set. And so we're just catching everybody up so that everybody's together. Cool. So like I said, when we get to this point, we're going to be reading the story called the Odyssey. And the Odyssey is a story of Odysseus and the travels that he made after something called the Trojan War. And the Trojan War was a real thing. Troy was a real place, a city-state. And Troy was a real place. And so there is some basis in history of these stories. In fact, a guy named Heinrich Schliemann actually went back and found the remains of Troy. I want to say the 40s, somewhere in like the 1940s. He went back and actually found it. So it's a real place, and these events are real in a way. But it also tells a mythological story with monsters and gods and goddesses and all sorts of crazy stuff like that too. So this story, like a lot of stories, has its basis in historical fact. So let's talk for just a second about the reality. Perfect. Okay, so you recognize Europe, right? This is a really old map. It's got countries that haven't existed for 25 years on them, but some of these places you can get the general idea. So we've got Europe here, like here's England, here's the Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, and this is Greece. This is the same general area where that still exists today that existed 4,000 years ago. And at this time, there's no such thing as a country, really, at this time. Basically, what you're dealing with is basically every city is its own country. And it's like, so imagine Greece is frankly pretty similar in size to Indiana, maybe a little bigger than Indiana, but about the same size. So imagine if every big city in Indiana was like its own country, and it had its own king, and its own queen, and its own royalty and stuff like that. Okay? But they also were kind of banded together the same way that, Muncie and Fort Wayne and Indianapolis and Kokomo and Noblesville, all these different cities banded together they were friends, allies, the same way that countries ally today. And so the whole story takes place here, and just in this small area. You gotta remember, of course, at the time there's no electricity, there's no steam power even for boats. I mean, if you're gonna sail a boat across a body of water like that, it's sails and oars, and that's it. And so most boats actually couldn't go this way. Like, you couldn't go through that kind of depth of water. You had to kind of stick close to shore. You can't keep enough provisions on a ship to last for any length of time or anything like that. So that's kind of the world that we live in, that we're talking about here. It's very small. You know, the whole thing, you could travel the entire story of the Odyssey, you could travel now in a couple of days, probably. And at this time, you know, this story takes, 20 years to tell the story. So, if you don't mind, this story goes all the way back. The original stories of the Trojan War predate the idea of writing, even. And originally, these stories were told by poets who would travel from place to place and just tell their stories. And they would come into a town and they would come into the town and people would feed them and they would tell their stories. So this is very much an oral tradition designed to be passed down from storyteller to storyteller. And so it seems only fitting that I just tell you the story like an old-fashioned storyteller. Would you guys be okay with that if I did it like that? Okay. These stories are originally attributed to a guy named Homer, who was who was blind, and that's kind of all we know about him, frankly. Is he a real person? Probably. But you guys have all played the telephone game, right? And so you know what happens to a story as it gets telephoned through the tree, right? So Homer was just the most famous of these storytellers, and over the span of hundreds and hundreds of years before they finally got written down, and the stories changed from what is probably a real story, something you can see the elements of truth in, get exaggerated, after telling, it becomes this mythological story full of monsters and magic and stuff that couldn't really happen. But there's definitely some kernels of truth in there that you can pick out. So, our story begins, as all stories do, on Mount Olympus with the gods and the goddesses. And gods and goddesses being, all powerful and that sort of thing, don't really have a lot to do except fuss each other and give each other trouble and find ways to pick at each other and tease each other and give each other a hard time. So some of the goddesses are sitting around trying to decide which goddess is the most beautiful. Because what else are you going to do, right? And so there are three goddesses kind of in contention for the most beautiful of all the goddesses. And the three goddesses are Athena, who's primarily known as the goddess of wisdom. And we're going to learn a lot about Athena. She's like the main deity character in the Odyssey. Hera, who is the mother of most of the gods and the wife of Zeus, the king of the gods. And Aphrodite, who's the goddess of love and beauty. You would think she would kind of have the edge in this contest, and she probably does. So the goddesses are trying to decide, who's going to, how are we going to judge this contest? And they choose a mortal named Paris to be the person to judge the contest. Don't let that get you confused with Paris from Romeo and Juliet or Paris the city. This is just the guy's name. His name is Paris. And so they bring Paris to Mount Olympus, and again, this is where this monotheistic, polytheistic thing gets weird. They literally pick him up and carry him to heaven, Mount Olympus, and ask him to judge this contest. But because it's gods and goddesses, they cheat, because that's what they do. And so Athena pulls Paris aside and says, listen, dude, I'm the goddess of wisdom, and if you choose me to win this contest, I will make you the wisest person in all the land. And you will be the smartest person, you will be the greatest military strategist, you'll be the greatest philosopher, and your words, your philosophies and your words and your wisdom will be passed down from generation to generation. And so you will become like the gods. You will become immortal because your words will last forever and you'll never be forgotten. Pretty good, huh? Not bad. So Hera, then, the queen of the gods, pulls Paris aside and says, well, I, being the queen of the gods, I can give you power. And you will become the greatest military leader in all the land. And you will conquer anyone that you choose to conquer. And you will go down in history as the greatest leader, the most powerful leader the world has ever seen. And so you will gain immortality because people will remember you forever. You will be, Paris the Great. And you'll be the guy, this is before history books, but you'll be the guy they talk about in history books for thousands of years, and you'll become immortal. Also not bad. So Aphrodite pulls Paris aside and she says, well, I can't offer you immortality. All I can offer you is heaven on earth. And she shows to Paris a vision of the most beautiful woman in the world. And her name is Helen. And she's immortal, just a regular woman, but Aphrodite says, you can have her if you want her. If you choose me to win the contest, then I'll make the most beautiful woman in the world fall in love with you. So, of course, Paris being a guy, that's kind of a no-brainer, right? Hell with immortality, I want the chick, right? So he chooses Aphrodite, he gives Aphrodite a golden apple, which is the symbol of the contest. And Aphrodite gets the golden apple, and then she sends Paris to Helen, and Helen immediately falls in love with Paris, and they're going to live happily ever after, except that Helen's already married. Because she's the most beautiful woman in the world. Of course she's already married. And she's married to a guy named Menelaus. And Menelaus is the king of a city-state called Troy. Now, Troy exists right here in what we now call Turkey, on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, I know you can't see this from where you are, but there's this little stretch of water right here, a little tiny stretch of water that connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Black Sea. So if you are a trader type, not a traitor, but a trader, one who trades, you're sailing your boat around here, and if you want to get here, you got to go through here. So Troy sits right there on the edge and basically takes taxes and stuff and controls the access to this other huge body of water. So Troy is this very wealthy, very powerful city, and Menelaus is the king. And so, no, I have that wrong. I'm messing that up. I'm messing this up. Shoot. Ruining my story by messing this up. And so that's where Paris is from. Paris is from Troy. He is the prince of Troy. Helen is married to Menelaus, who is the king of Sparta, which is in Greece, kind of right around here. And you guys, how many of you guys had seen 300? Have you guys seen 300 about the Spartans? Nobody? Okay. It's a great movie, but really, really violent. And so Sparta is this city-state. And so Paris and Helen take off, and Paris takes Helen back to Troy and brings her to this city that's like, the super high walls. The city of Troy's most famous feature is that it has 20-foot high walls, which in an age before gunpowder and stuff basically means you ain't getting in there. There's just no way in there to get through those walls with the technology that they have at this time. So, obviously the king of Sparta is not happy, and so he gathers up all of his allies all throughout Greece, and he's like, this dude just stole my woman, so we're gonna go get her back. And he calls on all of the other city-states of Greece to come and help him wage this war. And many of the great heroes of ancient Greece who have their own stories told about them, they all come to Troy to fight this war, and this is called the Trojan War, which maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't. And it's fought at Troy because you got the Trojans on one side and the Greeks on the other. Now, the most powerful general
of the Greek army is a guy named Achilles. And this story is primarily about him. Achilles is like, he's like Batman and Superman all put into one. He is the son of a goddess. And when Achilles was a child, his mother, who's Hera, took him to the river Styx and dipped his body in the river Styx, which is the river that leads to the underworld, and it's a magical river. And so basically everywhere that the water touched, Achilles was impenetrable to any sort of damage. So arrows would just bounce off of him, spears couldn't touch him, swords couldn't cut him, all that kind of stuff. And so Achilles goes to lead this war over in Troy. But again, you can't get through the walls of Troy. So it becomes what's called a siege. Is anybody familiar with that idea of a siege? You know what that means? Nobody? Okay. You know, it's basically the idea that we're just going to wait them out of food. We're basically going to, you know, because you have all the people inside the city, but all the farms, of course, are outside the city. So basically you just sit there and wait for them to come out because they got to eat at some point. They're going to run out of food. And you just kind of starve them out. And so the Trojans would come out from time to time, and there were skirmishes and things, you know, because all the while that this is happening with the humans on the ground, there's also the gods on Mount Olympus are all scheming and plotting against each other, and they all have different alliances and things. For example, Aphrodite is protecting Paris because he helped her win the contest. Whereas, like, Athena, she's pissed, and so she's helping the Greeks. Hera is Achilles' mother, so she's helping the Greeks. You know, and all the other gods and goddesses are picking sides and changing sides, and there's a lot of, like I said, intrigue and stuff where they're trying to, you know, convince the gods to pick one side or another, you know, the ones that are in the middle. And then you'll have other things like weird stuff, like without getting too deep into the specifics for a time standpoint, but you may have like Zeus, who generally likes the Greeks, but he likes this guy and this guy and this guy on the Trojan side. So he might be mostly helping the Greeks, but he's also helping this guy on the other side, and it's just a huge mess. And frankly, one of these days they're going to do the movie, and it's going to be awesome. There's going to be the, all the, 1,000 people on the ground fighting a ground fight, and then these giant gods, fighting above, and like fighting, hacking on each other with swords, and it's going to be glorious. But they haven't made it yet, but I can't wait. They keep making terrible movies about the Iliad and the Trojan War. They're always terrible, and they just haven't done it right. Someday, because it's a great story. And so there's all this going on, and it's just kind of a stalemate. And this goes on for 10 years. 10 years this battle rages, and they just can't, they can't pick a side, can't pick a winner. Until finally, one of the things that would happen is if the soldiers would get captured, they would ransom them back. You could buy the soldiers back with treasure and stuff. And so the great general Achilles captures some Trojan soldiers, and one of the ways that he gets ransom, both, we're talking about gold and jewels and, stuff like that, and also slaves. And you just kind of have to accept the fact that slavery is just a thing at this time still. And so this woman comes over as one of the slaves that is like a prize for Achilles. And the general, the main guy from the Greeks, Menelaus, decides, I want that girl. Mostly just to kind of put Achilles in his place a little bit, because even though Achilles is the best fighter, he's not the boss. So Menelaus says, I want the girl. Achilles says, you can't have the girl. Menelaus says, I'm taking the girl. So he takes the girl, and Achilles says, fine, then I'm not going to fight. And he literally just walks off the battlefield, and we have kind of one of the famous phrases from this is Achilles sulking in his tent. And he just goes off and pouts in his tent and refuses to fight anymore. So now things start to go badly for the Greeks, and the Trojans are pushing them back and winning battles and things without Achilles on the battlefield. And so one of Achilles' best friends name every year when I tell the story. I tell myself I need to write that down until I remember it, and I forgot to write it down again this year. But one of Achilles' best friends basically says, you know, I understand that you don't want to fight. You've been disrespected. You know, you deserve that. But your men are getting killed. Your fellow Greeks are getting killed. And so he says, let me borrow your armor at least. Allow me to borrow your armor so that we can inspire the Greeks, and they can fight. I mean, no matter what, you know, Achilles doesn't want Troy to win the war or anything like that. So he says, all right. So Achilles' best friend takes the armor of Achilles and goes off to fight, to fight. And of course, everybody then thinks it's Achilles, because Achilles has this real fancy golden armor. And so everybody thinks it's Achilles, and they all get inspired, like, oh, Achilles is back! And the Greeks come in, and, you know, and they start winning the war, and it kind of turns the tide of the battle towards the Greeks, until Hector, who I haven't talked about yet, but Hector's like the big guy on the Trojan side. He's like the Trojans' greatest hero. He thinking he's fighting Achilles, goes to Achilles' friend and slaughters him. Because he's no Achilles, whether he's wearing the armor or not. And so then Achilles gets pissed. And Achilles comes back to the battle basically just to call out Hector. He's like, I'm going to kill Hector. And so the whole battle stops, and it's just Achilles and just Hector kind of one-on-one. And everybody stops fighting, and it's just the two of them going at it. And Achilles, being as you can't cut him with a sword, you can't stab him with a spear, you can't shoot him with an arrow, so eventually he kills Hector. And then Achilles makes a big mistake. Is anybody familiar with the idea of hubris? Have you ever heard of that before? It's a pretty common word, but no? Hubris is like the ancient Greek idea of putting yourself above the gods. To the ancient Greeks, it's always the gods first and then you second. And so if you have this hubris, that means that you're not doing what the gods would want you to do. And part of that is that when you kill a hero in battle, if someone fights heroically and dies, they should be allowed to be buried properly. You know, proper burial and all that stuff. But instead, because Achilles is so mad, he takes Hector's body and ties it to the back of a chariot and then drives the chariot around the city of Troy, basically until there's nothing left of Hector but a couple of bloody stumps that are still tied to the back of the chariot, and the rest of him just gets mangled and destroyed. And so what happens is, then the gods who've been kind of protecting Achilles and helping Achilles out turn against him. And so now Achilles, who was once the favorite of all the gods, is now, you know, marked, not really, I wouldn't say marked for death, but the gods that were helping him stop helping him. And so that allows Aphrodite to tell Paris about Achilles' one weakness. Does anybody know? Want to guess?
Isn't it like his heel?
His heel, right? How many of you guys have heard of the Achilles heel or the Achilles tendon, right? If you look back, it's this great big one on your foot right here. That's that great big powerful one. And if you're an athlete and you rupture your Achilles tendon, that's like seriously bad news. And the reason why it's called that is because when Achilles' mother, I told you before, she dipped him in the river Styx, right? And I told you about that, and that's why he was impervious. Well, what she did was she took the baby, held the baby by its feet, and dipped it in the river. So where her fingers were holding on to the baby's feet were not impervious to the damage.
Wow.
Because they didn't touch the water. All she had to do was turn him over and dip his feet in too, but you know. Gods make mistakes. In this world, God makes mistakes in the ancient Greeks, for the ancient Greeks. So, Aphrodite tells Paris, who has not been fighting. Paris is more of a lover than a fighter. He's not a tough guy at all. He's an archer. So he stands up on the walls and like shoots down with arrows, so he never gets hurt. And she tells him about Achilles' weakness and helps him, guides his arrow so that he's able to shoot an arrow and it goes through Achilles' heel. And Achilles gets basically the first and only injury of his life, and he dies. And so now Achilles is dead. And now the tide of battle, of course, now really shifts towards the Trojans. And it looks like the Trojans are going to win. But at this point is where Odysseus steps into the story. And he's been, I've read the Iliad. He's in the story of the Iliad, the story of the Trojan War some. But he's not really at the forefront of it until the very end. He steps up at the end. He's the man with a plan. And his plan is to take, they build a giant wooden horse and leave this giant wooden horse on the beach. It's basically a trophy to say, okay, you win, we give. And the entire Greek army sails off the beach, sails out into the night, and leaves this horse on the beach. And so, I'm running a little short. I'm going to fast forward just a bit here, but basically, the Trojans bring this horse inside the city, and it's party time, right? Because they've won the war. They've been fighting this war for 10 years, and it's over. The Greeks just went home. We killed their big hero, and then they took off. So, drinking, partying, feasting, all through the night. And then, 3 o'clock in the morning, when it's pitch black, all of a sudden the bottom of the horse opens up. And inside the horse are Odysseus and about a dozen of the best Greek soldiers hiding inside the horse. How many of you guys have heard of the Trojan horse? Like that's a pretty common thing from this story. And so they hop out and they open up the gates, the walled city, open up the gates of the city, open it up. And in the meantime, the Greeks have only just sailed kind of over the horizon, just out of sight. And then as soon as it got dark, they all turned around and came back. And so in the cover of darkness, all the Greeks land on the beach, only now the gates of the city are open. All the Trojans are drunk or sleeping, or both. And so they just come in, the gates are open, and everybody's massacred. And they literally burn the city of Troy to the ground. And, Schliemann, who found the original remains of Troy, has found, through the different layers of time and stuff, has figured out that about the time that the Trojan War was supposed to have happened, this city was burned, and they can tell that. So we see that, we see there's at least some reality in that, and this is where that comes from. So that's the story of the Iliad. Thanks for listening. I guess we'll have to do your assignment later if I talk too long. Good work, guys. Tomorrow's fine. Today is good. We're able to do this, no problem. You will find everything. You couldn't get through Barracuda?
She's a librarian. I didn't even try, but we can do it.
This school kills me. Thank you, guys.